so I'll call to order the meeting of the Bridgewater Finance Committee for April 9, 2018.
The same for Budget and Finance Committee of the council.
So or Michael, I guess, do we want to cover the McGill property first? I have a little bit different order, but
It's up to you, yeah. Actually, you know what? We're waiting on one person for that agenda item, so if you want to go to the other two, or at least knock off the easy one.
okay, we have an acceptance of a gift from Howard 18033.
Do you want me to explain it?
Yeah, real quick.
Pretty simple. The Howard Foundation over the last 3 years has given a chunk of money for our senior center in order to provide additional programming, and this is just, I believe, the fourth. It might be longer than that, but this is just an additional gift for this fiscal year.
Questions about that?
I'll move to approve.
Right. I'll
We need to
second.
talk about it first.
Motion to
I'll
approve.
second for us. Any discussion? All right.
Motion.
Have a second? Second. Favor? Aye. Opposed? The next ordinance I have is to establish
And I'll be happy to go over that one if you'd like. I think everybody knows we've struggled for a number of years trying to figure out a way to fund the improvements, or essentially the reconstruction that we have to do on Elm Street. Elm Street's our premier, almost only industrial corridor in town, and it is so far relatively undeveloped as a whole. So with the help, well, actually with the help of the state and the Office of Economic Development, we did a mass grant application last year, which is quite an extensive application. We did not get it. We now have a warehousing and light manufacturing building developer who would like to put up something that's close to 500,000 square feet of space on Elm Street, which means roughly $430,000 a year in tax revenue. That's on the conservative side. So that developer will not come unless we, and I'm sort of boiling it down to the nuts and bolts, won't be interested in that property unless we rebuild Elm Street. So we are looking at, again, going out for MassWorks grant coming up later in the summer. But in the meantime, we are also asking the council to adopt a district improvement financing mechanism. Now, what that is, it takes the differential between the existing tax revenue, income tax revenue from whatever gets designated as the district, and the improved values over the course of the next however long it takes to pay off a road construction bond, takes that differential. So the improved values versus what exists right now takes that tax revenue and allows us to put that into a separate fund to pay for the improvements. In this case, presumably a bond issue that will pay for the entire reconstruction of Elm Street. So right now we've got expense projections of about $6 million on that bond, and what we're asking the council to do is to basically allow us to capture that $430,000 in increment or in differential, and apply that towards the bond that's required to do the road construction. So that said, if we get a MassWorks grant of anywhere between 3 million and 5 million. This next time around, that would offset that cost. So presumably would make the actual diff a fairly small increment to pay out over time, or we may choose to just pay it off and move on. So that is that's what this does. It is the first time it's done. In most other states, it's referred to as a TIF. In those states, a TIF in Massachusetts means something quite different. So in Massachusetts, it's referred to as district improvement financing, and it has been done in Brockton. It's been done in Worcester, Somerville. In fact, was it Assembly Mall or Assembly, whatever that's called now, was all done through, or mostly done through a DIF. Obviously, a much larger project and much different than ours, but DIFs are used essentially to finance the construction of infrastructure improvements, roads, water, sewer, gas lines, what have you. So what we intend to do here is simply pay for the reconstruction of Elm Street. That's about it.
Real quick, if the developer backs out, the exclusive, I guess, so we just wouldn't move forward with the project?
That's a great question, and it's essentially a timing issue. We wouldn't, if this particular one backed out, yes, we might delay the reconstruction. We've been in fairly close, constant contact, and they obviously they can't sign anything that commits them to building. That's not the way it works. But we're convinced that they're moving forward in conjunction with us. So if, I guess to answer your question, if for some reason they backed out, we've got probably 6 months before we even have to think about going out to bid on the reconstruction. So we simply wouldn't go forward. Having said that, though, since it's not just that one property that's included in the district, so if there are other properties that see incremental improvements, so somebody adds another warehouse, somebody builds on a green piece of property, that differential would also be included. So there would be a revenue stream in order to offset the cost of reconstruction, but we would have to play those numbers as the events unfolded.
I got a few questions. First one is what part, under this plan, what part would Chapter 90 money play in the road construction?
In this scenario, very little. Chapter 90, I think everybody knows, we get about $730,000 in Chapter 90 funds, and that covers, road repaving, reclamation, covers almost anything we do with the roads, short of striping. I think it doesn't include striping. So that's effectively our only source of money for all the rest of the roads in Bridgewater. So we wouldn't want to divert that Chapter 90 money away from the other pressing needs we have. So this would be separate and apart. The only thing that would play into this, as I said, is a potential MassWorks grant that could offset the total cost.
So the diff portion is only there while the bond is active?
Correct.
So if we did bond ourselves and we did get a mass grant to cover that, we would pay off the bond, the diff would no longer apply.
Yeah, the diff, we would extinguish the diff if there was no reason to have it at that point. We would also, just to give you just to put it in terms of numbers, if say we got a $6 million bond and I can't think that quickly, but say the yearly expense was $400,000. If we had $500,000 of revenue coming into the diff, 400 would go towards paying off the bond. The other 100 would flow back into the general fund.
Okay. So the bond would probably be a 20 or 30-year bond.
A bond for simple road construction can only be 15 years. If you do it within a diff, you've got more flexibility. You can go up to 30 years on a borrowing.
So if we say we did a diff, and so it's only taking new growth, right, and applying the taxes on the new growth toward that fund, can we partition that diff? Because if it were new growth without a diff, if it were pure new growth in the industrial area, then we've had a lot of discussions about pool and shared revenue and that sort of thing. In concept, 430,000 would be 215 toward operational fund, and about 215 toward assessment value.
Oh, yeah,
Shared
I see what you
value.
mean. Yep.
It's shared.
Yep.
It'd be pure shared value. So can we adjust how much of that would be toward the diff so that we also, because growth in the town, when we're talking about commercial growth, is the sense to drive down the cost of a new house against all of the operating costs. We want buildings without children, right? To pay for buildings with children and roads and other pieces, right? So could we change the amount of just, rather than just the taxes on the diff, could we say, okay, half the taxes are going in, and how does that affect the project?
You could, I think, in this case, I think the broader perspective is that, you want to get the project done, and you want to get it paid for. But most importantly, you want to get it done because we think it's going to spur a significant amount of additional new growth
So having a
in years
clean
after.
new road brings in additional growth, which then might pay the bond off faster
Right,
and get that
right.
whole revenue higher for the.
I think what you don't want to do is you don't want to shortchange your diff percentage and run the risk of not being able to cover that through the diff program, because then it becomes a general obligation.
Right.
Yeah, because if you don't have the revenue going into the fund, the sinking fund they refer to it as, then you either have to pay, you're going to have to pay for it out of the levy.
Right.
So the net effect is the same.
Yeah, I get that. Yeah.
You don't get any benefit
Right.
until the debt is paid.
Right. Right. But once it's paid,
It
then the whole growth
goes
is,
into the general fund.
especially other growth on the street. Presumably, there would be additional growth on that street, and then
The sinking fund is
Yeah.
intended to pay for the improvements and the debt related to it.
Yeah.
The quicker you pay it off, the quicker those monies directed back to the general fund.
thank you.
Couple question. I think this is a very good concept, and it is interesting, and I've read a little bit about it and how it's worked in other communities. The 2 points that I want to make, particularly to the group here, is number one, none of these taxes that we're talking about are currently on the docket right now, if you will, and so it's not affecting any of the presentations that we've had by the finance director over the past several weeks. But when they do come online, it is going to, as Councilor Wood said, it is going to hamper a little bit of how much shared revenue there would be between general government and the schools with this portion. Having said that, I think it's something that we should give a shot to, and perhaps this could even be paid for with that additional tax revenue without getting any grant. Do you think the revenue from that could pay for a payment over a period of, it's possible without getting, because there's no guarantees we're going to get the grant money, but the revenue could be enough per year, say $300,000, to pay for a payment over a 15-year period. And so so in Elm Street certainly does need to be redone, amongst other roads in this town. But I think this is a good concept. But is it also possible that this could be done in phases? Or would you do the RFP for the entire length of our portion? I mean,
I think
if it really got bad, could we do do it in phases or something? Because if we don't get a grant this year, we could get some next year. Would they consider an ongoing project? You know, something we've started that we,
I think if we were looking at, I mean, if we secured grant funding, I think we would have to do it as one project. I think that's a given. But your question is good about, you know, if we did the diff and, you know, say we got a portion down the road, no pun intended, but we got, you know, we got the final plans done, we had, you know, construction drawings, you know, we could probably split it up that way. Splitting the actual construction might be a little more problematic. I think it would probably end up costing us quite a bit more if we tried to do, you know, chunks of construction over, you know, a several-year period. I think the overall cost might be significantly more because you're paying for mobilization 2 or 3, 4 times, and there's an expense to that. So,
and this would just apply for any businesses that open up, or would it also apply to additional housing if there is any in that area? Whether they're condos or whatnot?
I would be surprised if there were additional housing units in the industrial area, but if there were, it would apply. They would also apply.
Okay.
Yeah, but I think that leads to a good point. If for some reason there's more development than we're expecting, that tax differential goes to pay off the bond, then we can choose to either pay early, or we can continue to pay the certain amount, the bond payment each year, and everything else flows over into the general fund.
In my view, I think it shouldn't be a long-term bond. I think 15 years, if that's the minimum, that's what we should shoot for, because by then the road's going to need to be redone again, if not before then.
That actually is a point very well taken, and I think our initial projection showed that if that one project came in, then the taxes generated from that could easily cover the bond payments under a 15-year term. So,
Can you help me understand this? What's the advantage of doing a diff over just taking the bond, fixing the road, and absorbing the tax revenue back into the general fund?
That's a good question. I think the certainty of getting, right, and for us right now, I think it's the certainty of a program that's actually going to get that road finished. If we do it differently, there's sort of a chicken and an egg. We're not going to see any new development, and we certainly don't have the capacity, the levy capacity right now to, you know, float a $6 million bond and be able to repay it within the levy limit. So we'd have to go out and do a debt exclusion. So you're going to the public and asking them to vote a debt exclusion for Elm Street, which is, my guess is, wouldn't pass because, you know, understandably so, people want to say, well, my road back, you know, in my neighborhood is really crappy. Why don't you fix that first? So there's not a level of understanding why getting Elm Street done and done quickly, you know, spurs enough new growth to, you know, be able to either plow back into the roads townwide, or at the very least reduce the tax burden on the residential tax base.
How firm is this guy's commitment to putting his $500,000?
They have an agreement to purchase the property, which is the first step, and they've done their due diligence on the property so that they know that they can build what they need to build. They've talked to a number of tenants. Their preference when they build, they're quite experienced, obviously. Their experience with other facilities is that they rent to one tenant. The tenant usually does build out. So they've gotten pretty far down the road, and they want to see us take some action, I think, before they commit fully. So action meaning, you know, if the council votes the diff, they will go ahead and begin their real development project.
And so the voting of the diff just establishes the area, establishes the mechanism. There's a series of steps. One being you'd have to come back to this body and get approval for a bond authorization.
Okay.
So there's a number of mechanisms. This is just to say, hey, from a financial standpoint, we have identified this area, assess the value as of January 1, 17 as our baseline, so that we can capture new growth as it occurs and begin to move that into sinking fund, which would pay for the debt. Never move forward with it, would dissolve the district, and those funds would go back to the general.
Another question. So I'm pretty sure I'm clear on this. But the properties that are paying into the tax levy today, that money is unaffected by this proposal. The monies would be solely on new growth on a road that would be improved if the mechanism works. And potentially, one property that you've described could pay for the whole thing. But if we have an improved road, it's likely that other properties will improve as well, and the end result will be much better than what we have.
Correct.
The corner of Pleasant and Elm, those two vacant corners, is that in play here too, if that was to be developed?
That's also in play, and we would also make, we would ask the engineers to include improvements to that intersection as part of the complete package.
Mr. Dutton, what was the reason why the Mass Works grant wasn't approved the last time, and what's going to be done differently this next time around to?
That's a
better
great
those
question.
chances?
So I went up to Boston and I talked to the Secretary of Community and Economic Development about exactly why our grant didn't get funded, because we saw a lot of virtually identical projects statewide get funded, and funded very well. And he said, well, really the only significant piece that was missing in our application was a more definitive projection of the jobs that would be created if we did this road project. So in other words, back then we had, well, I call them quasi-commitments from a lot of the people that have since either moved into Elm Street or who are currently on Elm Street, saying that, hey, if you improve this road, it's going to be a lot better. I can hire, a few more people. What we didn't have was the commitment from the company's name is DeBartolo, but we didn't have that commitment that they were going to build something of that magnitude on Elm Street, and we didn't have any calculations or any idea of who the tenant would be in that property, which is what MassWorks is really going after. The whole concept of MassWorks grants is to provide infrastructure improvements that are going to bring in new jobs, not necessarily jobs that are coming from, West Bridgewater to Bridgewater or, intrastate. What they're interested in is new jobs, overall new jobs to the state, which means more revenue, income tax revenue to the state, obviously. So that's really one of their primary focuses with MassWorks grants. So we now know that we can go to this particular developer, and by the time the next round of applications are due, they will have a much more concrete agreement with one of their tenants, and they can say, yes, this tenant is going to, create 100 new jobs in the town of Bridgewater, and the state then can say, okay, that makes a lot of sense. It makes a lot of sense for us to invest, $3 million worth of MassWorks money, if we're going to see, $1.5 million a year for the foreseeable future in additional income tax revenue. So that's specifically what he said was missing.
Tony, when you talk about new growth, that wouldn't affect, all these improvements would arguably increase the value of the current tenants. Would that be considered new growth?
No, that should be part of your reassessment. If tax values.
Could potentially, their properties could be assessed higher. So above and beyond this diff and the new property covering the bond, there could be still money coming in on the back end from those businesses.
Well, it doesn't, when you have an area that increases in value, it doesn't bring in additional revenue unless it's new value that's been brought on prior year in comparison. But what it does do is it can shift the tax burden. So if you had one part of your town, I'll exaggerate, that went to a value of $1 billion, I don't know, they struck gold. In essence, it really was valued on an income basis that way. You could see a shift in the burden because it's just a mathematical equation. Whatever you collected in taxes this year, you have to collect 2.5%. The values determine how it gets portioned to the different homeowners. Some homes go up in value, someone puts an addition on in year 1, but in year 2, 3, and 4, that house could continue to rise if they're in a high value neighborhood. Other neighborhood values could go down. So just by that nature, you shift the tax burden because you pay per thousand. So if your values go up by 1,000, tax rate is this, you're going to pay per thousand. But again, it's just a shift. So in that respect, the more commercial you have, more development in that area, it speaks to what the Wood talked about, getting dollars that don't put children in seats and may not require the other services, and therefore you're getting more from that dollar. Then you're also shifting the burden on the existing.
Motion to
Are
approve.
you for it?
Second.
I'll make a motion to approve it. Second, are you unanimous?
For those that didn't hear, Councilor Gallagher and I first and second to recommend to the council to approve.
Thank you. I think not for nothing, I think this is,
It's a good policy to have in place, yeah.
I think this is a really good thing for the town, and I think it's got some level of creativity, which I think is really good, and I think we're going to get something done. So I appreciate it.
We got that one.
Yep.
All right. So, my job in town is to go out and make sure that the town's interests are protected whenever we have, anytime, actually, when we do anything. And I realize that there's a lot of sort of background noise and static noise surrounding this particular transaction or proposed transaction. And I get that. That's my job is not to try to control or answer the background noise and the static noise that's around. My job is to make sure that I do my fiduciary duty and make sure that I give, obviously, the Finance Committee and the council the best advice that I can. So this proposal is, I think, the best, or else I wouldn't recommend it. I think is the best overall deal for the town, and I think you'll see why. I hope you'll see why in a few minutes. What I've asked is Jason Korb and Matt Zahler to come. They've formed a joint partnership to do this project. The project overall is a little over $20 million project that creates 52 units of housing in the old McElwain School and one new structure. So it accomplishes a couple of things. I think most foremost, for us, it reuses a historic building that's on the National Historic Register and brings it back to life. I also think that it passes an enormous liability off of our shoulders, and I'll talk more about that a little bit later, but takes an enormous liability off of our shoulders and places it where rightly it belongs, in the private sector. I think it also gets this property back on the tax rolls, gets it earning money for the town overall. And so, for that, I think it's a good project as well. And finally, it gives Bridgewater a preference. I mentioned the MassWorks grant a few minutes ago. Right now, every MassWorks grant, every land grant, park grant, complete streets grant is viewed, and those communities that have adopted Housing Choice Initiative and acted pursuant to it, which this project would, have priority funding under all of those other state grant programs. So I think that's incredibly important. It's not easily quantified, but I think that's incredibly important factor here too. So I asked Jason and Matt, who were the only responsible and responsive bidders on the RFP, to come and give. They've done a couple of number of presentations actually to different town boards and committees. I think Community and Economic Development and Planning Board. I think you've been to the CPC, and so now they're here to give you a very quick presentation on what their intent is under this purchase and sale, and what the property would look like, and also answer some of the questions I think that the council had at its last meeting, as well as what's, a lot of the noise. I'll let them answer the noise questions because they're probably in a better position to do it. So if you want to come on up and
The presentation, I don't know if you have it preloaded or.
we can do.
We gotta get this tomorrow night too?
Well, can I?
Wish we knew this was.
So that's got the presentation?
Yeah.
On, so you can get at the
Sure.
software, right?
Thank you. There's a clicker too, I don't know.
Is this on tomorrow night's agenda?
Yes, it is on the agenda, but it may be premature to try to get a vote. I think there's still a lot of questions, so.
Well, Dennis raised an excellent point. Are we going to, on the council level, can have the same presentation?
We certainly can if you think it's going to be useful.
Thanks, yeah.
And I think it would be.
Personally, I mean, before we get into details, I think it would be useful and we can talk to the president about agendas, but not having the presentation one week, but not having the vote that same night.
Sure. I'll let this load, and thank you all for having us this evening. We appreciate it. My name is Matt Zoller. This is my partner, Jason Korb.
Hi, good evening.
And we are very interested in the McElwain School and redeveloping it for a housing use. So what we have tonight is a pretty straightforward, simple presentation. We wanted to give you a quick overview about us, talk a little bit about the project that we put in our RFP response, and then answer some of the questions that we're hearing through this process. We submitted back in September of 17 was when the response was due. So we've been engaged for quite a while, as Michael said, and we're really excited about this. I think this is a great opportunity for the town. It's a great opportunity for us. So we'd want to partner with you all to make this come to fruition. So with that, and you can speak to these, Jason, or I can
Sure.
speak to them.
Yeah, so I used to work at Beacon Communities, which developed the Wilbur School in Sharon, which I know a number of you have been looking at that lease. I actually negotiated that lease for Beacon. I worked on the shovel works when I was at Beacon as well in Easton. My background is historic preservation, adaptive reuse in downtowns, that sort of thing. In 2010, I left Beacon to start up my own company called Capstone Communities. I found this building on the internet. I'd never been to Brockton before. I went down there and fell in love with the building. 3 years later, converted it to 25 units of mixed income housing. This is on Montello Street, directly across the street from City Hall, if those of you know downtown Brockton. It was actually Brockton's first brick shoe factory, and it's believed that the catcher's mitt, the baseball catcher's mitt, was invented in this building. It has a really amazing sports history I can share with you offline another time. This is a building in Cambridge. I do a lot of work in Cambridge. This is 100% affordable. It was a vacant site, and we partnered with the city to build 20 family-friendly affordable housing apartments. The building, people who walk by think it's high-end condos, and when you walk inside, it's really sleek and contemporary. It's not what you would typically think of as affordable housing. I'm also working on a $20+ million deal in Porter Square right now. The city's allocated over $7 million to us for that. Involves the historic restoration of 3 homes, and we're actually going to lift one up and move it forward too. So that's kind of what I have in my pipeline right now, along with working with Matt on this. And Matt and I actually met in downtown Brockton when he was with Trinity, and he'll share some of those projects with you.
So, thanks, Jason. I've been in the development business for about 10 years now. Before that, I was in design and construction. I worked as an architect on the boards, and then transitioned to development. So my development experience is mostly in Massachusetts. I have worked some in New York, and so I've been with Trinity for about 8 years, and just recently left to start my company, MPZ Development. And when I was with Trinity, I did about 1,000 units of mixed income housing in various types of projects that were urban infill projects. They had mixed income uses, and they used historic tax credits. So all of the same elements we're employing here at the McElwain, we're going to introduce, we have dealt with before. So just 2 quick projects. One in Harlem. This was a rehab of 22 5-story walk-up brick row houses, and what we did was conjoin them into 2 buildings and added an elevator. Used state and federal historic credits and other subsidy resources for this. And then, as Jason said, we met in Brockton several years ago. I was responsible for the master plan and redevelopment of this 3-acre city block in downtown Brockton, and completed the first phase, which essentially was the redevelopment of the Enterprise newspaper headquarters, and then 113 units of mixed income housing. You can see the finished building here with a small pocket park renovation and a large parking lot in the back of the building. So significant experience on both our ends. We know a lot. We don't know everything. We've learned a lot, and so we're bringing those things to bear here in Bridgewater. So you all know the site quite well, but I just want to run through these slides so you can see what our proposal was. So there it is on 250 Main Street. You can see the McElwain School here, and then the building that was demolished. So it's a 2-acre site, as you all know. Here is an existing conditions set of photos of the McElwain. So front, side, back, rear. We think it's a beautiful building, and it should be brought back to its former grandeur. So that's what we'd really like to do. The inside of the building here. So it was closed in '96, I believe. And so it's been somewhat closed from the elements, but they are certainly getting in there, some broken windows and things. So it's deteriorating pretty rapidly, but still it's in good shape. It would make a great redevelopment project, so that's why we think it's an opportunity here. Here's the back site, and then we took a picture of the building at night. It's kind of hard to see here. It's not lit very well, so that's part of the issue. And that's why we want to repurpose it and bring it back to life, use the appropriate architectural lighting, do some interesting things. So here's our redevelopment plan, and I think a site plan is probably the best way to explain what we're trying to do here. So in the McElwain building seen here, we have 16 units, 15 2-bedrooms and 1 1-bedroom unit. And then in the back, then we have a small connecting park that we've proposed. It could be a playground, it could be green space. We haven't worked through the details of that yet, but we think it's a great amenity to the town and the project. And then the new building we're proposing is 36 units, and it's 1, 2, and 3 bedrooms, predominantly 1 bedrooms in this building. And then we have a 1-to-1 parking ratio. So within the site, it's heavily landscaped, beautifully landscaped, and then parking spaces to accommodate the residents that will come to live here. So that's the plan. Here is a rendering of what the McElwain looks like today and what it may look like after we finish the redevelopment. So that's just an architectural artist's rendering. And then we're going to get into some of the things that we had at the front of the presentation, so I'll let Jason kind of walk
Sure.
through
I
this.
just wanted to add a few quick things to Matt's presentation as well. So redeveloping these buildings is incredibly expensive, as you can imagine. We've read all the comments online, we've watched all the videos, and we know some people think they can get it done a lot less expensively, and we'd love to do that. We'd love to do this as inexpensively as possible. We also have to build a high level of quality too, because we'll be owning this building for at least 15 years. So I wanted to mention that, and then also kind of walk you through the different concepts that we've seen and respond to those. We believe that this will create a public-private partnership with the town. So we're not coming in here telling you we're doing one-for-one parking and that's what it's going to be, right? We want to work with the town to come up with a concept that we think makes sense and that you think makes sense. We've heard feedback that we have too much parking. We've heard feedback from a lot of people that we don't have enough parking. So those sorts of things, in terms of visioning for the site, the historic rehabilitation of the building, do we have enough parking? What would the park look like? Those sorts of things. We really want to incorporate the community as a part of it. These projects only work by working together as a partnership. We're really in it for the long run with you. This isn't a development deal where we build the building and walk away. We're really heavily invested in the community, and we're really here to stay. We are proposing funding from the town as well, CPC funding, and we can get into that a little bit later. But that makes the town a lender to the deal. So the funds would not come in as a grant. They would actually come in as a loan. So the city would, or excuse me, the town would be on par with all of the other state lenders as well. So you'd have a seat at the table. And there's certain financial benefits that the state looks for as a lender, and then you'd also be there as well. So if there's construction cost savings, the town would be eligible to share in those. If there's excess cash flow beyond what would be considered a reasonable return, and those are things we talk about, that excess cash flow would be shared with the town as well. And then we also mentioned financial transparency. So we get independently audited every year. Those audits would be available to your committee, to the town council to review them, and this whole entire process would be very, very transparent. As was mentioned earlier, MassWorks grants, the HCI program is a new program that's currently, I believe, in front of the legislature and in the process of being passed. HCI creates priority for cities and towns that take control of their housing destiny, in essence. That take control and say, okay, we're close, or we've met our 10% under 40B, right? But we want to do more, and we want to do it strategically. We want to save an old building and accomplish it that way. So that would give you a priority for MassWorks. And then the town, we haven't asked for any abatement of any fees or real estate taxes. We project that between building permit fees and other connection fees, the town will receive almost $210,000 in one-time fees and about $100,000 a year in annual recurring revenue. Let me just mention one other, just so, because we've given this presentation so many times that, just to catch people up who haven't heard it before. The front building, we propose to build workforce housing. So that would go up to 120% of the area median income. So is everybody familiar with that calculation, area median income? So what's the actual number? We brought the numbers with us, but HUD kind of designates an area, so it's not just the town of Bridgewater, but it's a bunch of cities and towns. So the 120% of the area median income for a 3-person household is like $90,000, right? So these are people who work, who make a decent living, who are starting to get priced out of communities like Bridgewater. And then the rear building would be, and it's a lot of it's driven by the subsidy programs and their restrictions, would be set aside to households earning 60% of the area median income. And to give you the exact numbers, a 3-person household that makes about $45,000 a year would qualify for those apartments. So, we wanted to talk about the CPC. So we have read a lot of the comments online and reading that, people want to see the funds be used to repair roads and go into the schools, and that's clearly the priority. And we get that, and that all makes sense. But the funding that we're requesting, Community Preservation Act funds, can only be used, as many of you know, for 3 specific things, right? Historic preservation, preservation of open space, and creation of affordable housing. And we believe that this proposal meets all of those. Obviously the historic building, the preservation of open space, so creating a playground or some sort of passive open space, again, part of the community process, and the creation of affordable housing. The CPC funds cannot be used to demolish a historic building, nor can it be used to abate a historic building that then will be demolished. So it has to preserve historic preservation. So I just want to make that very clear, that these are not funds that are being taken away from the school system or from DPW. There is, I think, over $600,000 in CPC funding currently allocated for affordable housing. Am I correct about that? 750.
780.
Since Bridgewater enacted the CPC, the funds allocated for housing have never been used for a housing project, is my understanding. It's been used to do your housing production plan, to hire some staff, those sorts of things. It's never actually gone toward a project. And I think it's important to point out that for the workforce units, we looked at the census data, and about 45% of Bridgewater's residents would qualify for these workforce units. And that's a lot of people who are elderly who don't want to maintain a single family home, like my mom who moved into a condo, or you can't afford it because you're on SSI, and you worked hard and want to stay in your community, but there aren't too many options. And you don't want to go out and live in a 40B by the highway, right? You want to be downtown. You want to be in the town. You want to live in a building maybe where you went to school or your kids went to school.
Walk to amenities, walk to the Central Square area.
So that's kind of what this will offer. This is not like the typical 40B down by the highway. I think it attracts a different group of people. Let's see. I don't want to repeat myself. So some of the things that we're committing to, that is an additional benefit, that's more of a qualitative benefit to the town. The park would be public and open to the public. There would be, in the new building, there would be a community room. Again, we could work on the programming of that. That would be open to the community. There would be some sort of mechanism to reserve the room. People couldn't wander in and out, but we'd have some sort of mechanism online, probably other options like a phone if someone didn't have an internet access, to be able to reserve that room. And we are required to maintain long-term ownership. And this is real. I've written checks before when there's problems. Matt and I sign guarantees, and when stuff happens, there's actually a person behind it. This isn't public housing. It's not the housing authority, not that the work that housing authorities do are great, but there's actually someone behind it. So I drive down to my properties at 10 o'clock at night to see what's going on because A, I take pride in my work, and B, I want to know what's going on because I'm financially on the hook. These guarantees actually last for 15 years. So we're signing for 15 years. We bring in an investor that ends up getting allocated tax credits, and that investor requires us to guarantee the tax credits. So if the development isn't running smoothly, if it's not clean, if it doesn't meet the standards, if we have to evict people, those sorts of things, we're ultimately on the hook for that. And this has happened, and you have to step up to the plate. So and we've become part of the community. In Brockton, one of my best friends is Mary Waldron. She works at Bridgewater State. She's like family to me. We basically adopt these communities that we work in, and these developments. I've heard the word boondoggle around this development, and how we're going to be making so much money. Yet we're the only ones that actually applied, submitted a proposal. These are not boondoggle deals, and we're happy to explain to you why they're not. You know, I do a lot of market rate housing in some of the wealthiest communities. I have 30 units of high-end market rate housing in Cambridge and Somerville and Arlington, right? I do a lot better on those than I do on these, but this is what I'm really passionate about. You know, restoring historic buildings, providing housing for people that have been priced out of their communities. It's very important to me. It's a boondoggle for how I feel at the end of the day. It's not a boondoggle in terms of financially. So we've also heard people bring up the Wilbur School and other schools and say, why isn't Bridgewater getting this deal or that deal? So we actually have the Wilbur School lease here today too. We're happy to pull out all the details, but we kind of summarize them here. So we wanted to point out what Sharon is actually getting and what actually they gave in the Wilbur School, because we hear a lot of, well, the developer agreed to pay $1.3 million lease payment to the town. The town of Sharon spent $1.5 million on the Wilbur School before it was conveyed to Beacon. They spent $300,000, $200,000 on studies, and they spent $1.3 million on abatement of asbestos. So when I was at Beacon and we came into the building, all the asbestos was gone. There was a $1.3 million lease, which then was amended to have an upfront payment of $650,000 and a deferred payment of $650,000 for 17 years after the property closed. So the first lease payment is not due until 2027. So on day one, the town had spent $850,000 more than they actually received for this property. So yes, technically Beacon paid the town money, but the town had remediated all of the asbestos. And I added a little caveat there saying that basically if Beacon got additional awards of state historic tax credits, that would be split with the town. That's also something that we've proposed, that if there's excess subsidy, we propose reducing the CPC funding. I believe that's in the purchase and sale agreement. The Cody School and the Simpson School, those are done by Stratford Capital Group. The developer paid $400,000 for the Cody School and $563,000 for the Simpson School. It received Barnstable home funding, though, on the Cody School. This is the part you don't see in the lease, of $500,000. So the developer put in $550,000 because they actually had to create additional parking off-site. And the details here, I think, are really important because we've heard this being talked about a lot. And there was hazmat in the building, just as there is in the McKelman. But really, if you take the $500,000 that the town gave and the $550,000 that they paid $50,000, right? The Simpkins School received $250,000. They paid $563,000. There's one really important difference between the Cody School and the Simpson School and what we're proposing. The Cody School is 100% affordable at 60% of the area median income, meaning that they can get low-income housing tax credits for every single one of their apartments. Okay, low-income housing tax credits are worth $200,000 a unit in free not free, but in subsidy. When you have a workforce housing unit, you lose that $200,000 right off the bat. Right? You get $100,000 of workforce, so you're actually down $100,000. You know, the same thing with the Simpson School. It's 90% low-income housing tax credit. Right? So 90% of the units received federal low-income housing tax credits. You don't get any of that with workforce housing units. So I just want to be clear about that. We do get a subsidy. We would apply for a subsidy for mass housing. It would give you $100,000 a unit. But there's a gap there. We've also heard about the appraisal that the town has for $950,000 or so. 60, I believe. So we spent the last few days digging into the appraisal. First of all, it assumes the building has no environmental contamination. And have any of you been through it? There's 9x9 tiles. There's a boiler that's covered with asbestos. There's asbestos throughout the whole building. It also assumes that the condos, when it looks at the condo approach, it assumes that the condo sales prices will be $320,000 for a 2-bed and $220,000 for a 1-bed. So Matt and I got on MLS today and we looked at, well, in the last 6 months, how many sales were there and what was the average sale price of condos in Bridgewater? Because the appraiser only uses one condo comp from Bridgewater. So we found 28, and the average price is $190,000 per unit. And there was only one sale over $300,000, and that was for a townhouse. The units in the school building that the appraiser is assuming are 920 square feet, right? There's no differentiation in the appraisal between the sale price of a 920 square foot two-bed and a 1,600 square foot townhouse. They're all labeled as $320,000. And finally, well, not finally yet, but the rehab construction costs are $126 a foot. So we called our friends that do a lot of school buildings today, and they actually sent us detailed estimates that one of them came in today from a very reputable contractor. It was $230 a square foot in rehab costs. And obviously we have to use contractors that are bonded, that have really high bonding capacity, you know, and understand and are able to complete these projects. They're very complicated. And finally, the one thing we saw and we kind of laughed a little bit was it assumes that the units are going to be sold over 4 years, and they're going to be constructed and sold, constructed and sold, constructed and sold. Except you can't really do that with a historic building where you build 4 units, open the 4 units up in the building, but don't do anything else to the rest of the building, and then build another 4 units in the building, right? But leave the rest of it vacant. You either redevelop the building all at once, you know, or it stays vacant.
You couldn't get a certificate of occupancy.
Yeah. So I'm sorry we're going through this in a lot of detail, but we did listen to, we did hear, and we do have a number of responses. Michael talked about the fact that the building is very difficult to insure. I'm not sure it can be insured. The cost to demolish the building, we actually went out and got some estimates. Now, we haven't done thorough environmental testing. We did send our consultant through to look at visually what could be asbestos. And so to demolish the building would be about $875,000. We went to a demo contractor who's very reputable. Matt's going to distribute those out to you so you can see those. And that, of course, doesn't include any soil or groundwater contamination. There could be an underground storage tank. There could have been an underground storage tank in this property. We just don't know. And so a few other things. If the development moves forward, yeah, so we had our environmental consultant take a look and come up with estimates on the asbestos abatement. A few things we just wanted to clarify from the last council meeting. So if we move forward and you agree to sign the purchase and sale agreement, all of the pre-development expenses, all of the architecture, I want to go on the record for this too. So all of the architecture, all of the engineering, any cost that we incur, that is solely at our risk. We are not coming back to the town. Okay, this is completely at our risk, and that's how this agreement is drafted. The agreement is drafted just as we draft one with a private seller. And in fact, we wrote into the agreement that if we were to walk away, we would hand all of our due diligence at our cost over to the town. And the town wouldn't have to spend a thing to get any of that. So if we have architectural plans, environmental, all of that would go to the town for free. And finally, the purchase and sale agreement would be a binding document. So obviously we can't go ahead and spend $300,000 on pre-development costs and then have the town have the ability to walk away. But I think what we're here to say is that we're here to restore this historic, beautiful building, to do something right. I think you can check our reputations. We really enjoy working with communities to help you, bring to fruition your vision. We are somewhat constrained by the subsidies that are out there. This is really the only way that we know how to do this. And we just put together some costs for you to take a quick look at as to, well, if this were just market rate, how would this work? And so without going into too much detail, as a rental, your return on cost is like 4.4% or 5.5%. You can dig into the details later. We're assuming $2,000 a unit in rent. Doesn't seem unrealistic. $7,000 a unit in operating costs. That includes vacancy and reserve contributions. I don't think that's unrealistic. There's really no private developer out there that would do this at a 4.4 cap or a 5.5 cap. You might see that in like the financial district in Boston at a 5.5 cap, but certainly you have to be north of 7 somewhere, in the outlying areas like here. And then as a condo, assuming that the townhouses sell for $300,000 and the smaller 2-beds sell for $225,000, you still have a gap of $5.5 million. We just tried to make it really simple. Back of the envelope, this is what we're looking at. We even reduced the construction cost by $4 million on the right side, and just took a look at what that does. The same thing, if you reduce the construction cost by $4 million on the condo side, you still have $1.5 million gap. You know, you'd have to sell condos for $400,000, $500,000. And I don't think anybody thinks that's realistic here.
And we did do a 52-unit building in both of those scenarios.
Yeah, yeah. So that's our presentation.
We'd love to hear questions.
Love to hear questions. We tried to answer a lot of your questions already.
I have a few questions.
Sure.
Where does Capstone get most of their capital from?
Great question. So I've done fairly well in the last 8 years since I started my company. I'm very well capitalized personally, and I keep reinvesting profits from my deals back into my company. So with regard to guarantees and pre-development costs and things like that, I have a fair amount of liquidity that I end up using as my guarantee.
So you make presentations to like trust funds and so forth to get capital?
No,
Okay, so how,
it's all mine. So I've grown it over the years. So I started investing in real estate in Cambridge in 2008.
I think it's a different question, though. I think you're asking about the end investor for
Right.
projects.
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought you were just talking about operating capital. So for a deal like this,
yes.
so it's all financed by tax credit, equity, debt, grants that act as debt, those sorts of things. We're really in it for the fee. The fee is how we make our profit. So
And HIC would be an investor that we would go to buy the tax credits or to syndicate the tax credits out. And then they go to large insurance companies that need the credit, or other investors.
The main issue that really is going on in this community, and for me, it's not the concept of what you guys want to do. I don't have a major problem with the concept. Some people might have a little bit, but the concept of what you want to do, it seems okay to me to the most extent. But the issue really is, and I understand the community preservation money, the way it is set up with the 3 different funds, and this is a perfect example as to how to use those funds. If that committee sees fit as well, because that's another avenue you're going to go through.
Mm-hmm.
But as we heard earlier from our town manager, we're looking to borrow millions of dollars through a bond for a road that needs to be severely repaired in town. What the people that I hear through the background noise that it was referred to, is the fact that the town is not receiving a fair market value for that property. And you didn't mention that at all during the presentation. And I'm not blaming you for that. I mean, I think that's an issue that the council is going to struggle, and maybe and certainly the finance committee. If the value of that property is $950,000 or it's $600,000, we should have gotten more than $1. That's just not fair to the taxpayers of this town. We could have used that $400,000, $600,000, $900,000, whatever was negotiated, to repair some roads or to buy some equipment for our departments that need it through capital. That's what I was hoping. So that's the big problem that I hear as a councilman in this community. So that's the hurdle we have. But the concept and your presentation was great. And I've seen, projects like this and presentations made before where you want to develop and bring an old building back to life. However, I particularly don't think it's a significant historical building in this community. I don't. But the RFP was written in such a way that I think that, you're somewhat obligated to renovate it, but you could tear it down if you wanted to. That restriction is not, you're not restricted to renovating. Is that correct?
So we probably couldn't with the proposal that we have today.
Right.
Because we'd be using federal funds, and we wouldn't, if we tried to demolish the building, we would not be eligible for federal funds.
So
any sort of federal funds.
When this was first proposed, I wasn't a big fan of it. I think with one respondent, I think the RFP should have been rewritten so we would get a few more responses and maybe some money for the value of the property. That's all kind of looking at this, and most of the people in Bridgewater are saying, we're not going to give this away and then use community preservation, because a lot of people don't understand the community preservation money and how that really is earmarked for something like this. So if we were getting a significant amount of money from the sale, I don't think I'd be hearing a lot of what I'm hearing, and that's a big issue out there. Not necessarily, for the most part, what you want to do. So that's the hurdle that I struggle with right now, is I just don't think it's a fair deal for the town of Bridgewater. Concept is fine, but the deal is not a good one.
I just have a quick question. I understand, obviously, we disagree.
Yeah.
Part of the presentation was trying to attempt to show that the fact the site does not have value. Can you explain a little bit further what about the site you think does have value? We think there's a lot of things that, we think it's a very attractive site, but we think there's a lot of things that detract from the site. For example, the cost to remediate the asbestos, the unknown environmental issues that may be in the soil and groundwater, the cost to rehab the school, and if you don't keep the school, demolish the school, right? So there's a lot of factors. Obviously, it's a wonderful site, but there's a lot of intrinsic factors to the site that hinder the development opportunity.
Well, and I think that is something any investor plans when they're going to buy a piece of property. And I watch those home renovation programs on TV, and all of a sudden the developer finds, oh my God, the beam isn't right. And now that adds costs to the project. Those things are are budgeted in, or you have to take away the chandelier and to get the beam done right. Those things happen during construction. I think that any proposal, any developer going into an old building like that is going to understand that these types of hazards are going to be there or not going to be there. But you had that right through a home inspection or a building inspection before any offer on the property would be made. But I think that there are developers out there that probably would respond to an RFP if it were written a little bit differently. And at least if you're talking $20 million project, what is so wrong about Bridgewater, the Bridgewater coffers or our capital project fund getting $700,000-800,000? I don't see the big deal. So that's the problem I have, and a lot of people do as well. And I just speak as one person. But I don't disagree with your concept. It's a good one, and I think you have some good success there. And I don't know where this is going to go. I don't.
Sure. Thanks.
I have a couple questions about the project structure. So during the presentation, you said 52 units, so it'd be 60 and 36, right? And then I saw 920 square feet. Are all the units identical, or would there be variation?
The 920 square feet was taken from the appraisal. Sorry, so that was...
So in the structure you're thinking about, what would the constitution of the units be and size?
So they would all be flats. Both buildings, I'm buying time. Both buildings would be elevator buildings. And I think the 2 beds are in the McElwain building around 8.
No, they're not, actually. They're smaller. The unit sizes of the 1 bedrooms.
Yeah.
Before, yeah.
So it's 850
Yep.
for the 2 beds.
Yep, and
And 660 for the 1 beds. So relatively small.
850 for 2 beds, right?
Yep.
And 650. Right, yes. All right. And then you're doing 1-to-1 parking based on a unit, not a bedroom,
Correct. Correct.
right? So how many bedrooms overall do you have, are you proposing?
So I don't have that
Why don't you just do an
calculation in front of
approximate,
me.
though?
Sure, so 23, 4, 9, and 15 is 25, 26, 50.
I'm going to guess 80.
Yeah, 80.
So 80 bedrooms. I did read through the Wilbur document. Significant difference between that project and this project, setting aside credits and that sort of thing, is the building reverts back to the town after 75 years. Right, so that's a lease, not a purchase sale. And if I recall the structure, so you talked about the initial payment of I think it was 1.2 or 1.3, split into 2 pieces, but there's also a recurring payment of $18,000 for the lease. Is that right?
No, there's 60,000 starting in 2027, I believe. We have the lease here.
2030, actually.
No, it's 17 years after,
That's the,
no later than 2030.
that's the deferred portion.
And the building is generating taxes as well?
It is. Yep. No, the 18,000 was a prepaid deposit. So they were applying the prepaid deposit against the initial deposit.
Okay.
Yeah, so it's not 18,000 a year. So it basically says, so the total is 1.375, and it says annual payments of 60,000, each commencing on March 1, 2030, and payable on every March thereafter. Initial base rent shall be paid as 703,000, which after application of the prepaid deposit of 18,000, there's a balance of 653,500 remaining to be paid, right? And then there's a provision that basically says that if Beacon gets additional state historic tax credits,
Right.
that would be split between the town and Beacon at 50-50 split. That split payment to the town though would go to the lease payment, so it'd be a reduction in lease payments. Yeah.
But I'm sure you answered this already. There's also tax payment, real estate taxes involved, right? So,
Yep.
so
Yeah.
the town of Sharon is taxing based on fair market value, whatever that calculation is.
Which is the equivalent
Same
to here. We're proposing the same thing here.
Yeah. I think that's probably why people are a little bit bothered by this program, because I'll tell you why. When I was doing some of the reading, it's the 36-unit building that's behind, right? So if you're assuming the overall deal is $1 plus we would pay out of CPC, assuming they agree to that, $700,000, right? Which is yeah, there's a match, but it's tax money, and I agree, we haven't done a great job in this town about using housing money out of that fund. And maybe this is a project, or there's a couple other buildings that are eligible for it. But when I separate the front parcel from the back parcel, and I say, well, if we allowed a shared driveway, or there was a driveway, and we wanted to sell the back parcel to someone who wanted to develop 36 units, that would probably be more valuable in itself than this deal sounds like to me. Right? Like, even if they did it at market value instead of the low income value. So I'm trying to come up with a reason why the town would get behind a dollar sale.
Yeah,
That's what
let
I'm
me
trying to
just,
do.
let me say one thing, and I appreciate that perspective. This building has never been on the tax roll. Because it was a public facility.
Right.
So that is automatically realizing, municipal revenue by doing a project such as this one. As it relates to the market rate piece and, kind of cutting off that and reparcelizing the back half of the site, you would run into a whole host of issues, but I would go back to the analysis that we presented where we showed you what return on cost would have to look like.
Yeah.
And you just can't build a new building with the rents that are supportable here in Bridgewater. That just doesn't, the math doesn't pencil. It may be different, out by the highway, you could get a little bit higher rents, maybe costs are lower, but not in this location.
Quick question. So the town of Sharon put in $1.5 million to the school, right? So I don't think we can dismiss that. So on paper, it may look like a payment is being made, but in fact, you're just repaying the town for costs that they've already incurred. In fact, if you present value the future payment from 20 years later to the current present day, the town is out of pocket pretty significantly. Yeah. What's up?
Less than $1.
Oh, yeah, no, that's what I'm saying. Yeah, exactly. If you present value those payments starting in 2030, right, that continue on for many years to the current day, town is, not getting what they put into
but
it.
when we're all gone, the town gets the building back.
Yeah, but what are they going to do with a residential building? I mean, it's,
Well, that's beyond the discussion. But I'm always concerned about giving away property that the town owns, even if it's not on the tax rolls, because you can't buy that back, right? You can't, if you try to go and buy a building because you need additional office space, that's a lot of out-of-pocket costs. So I'm myself, my own opinion, I'm a bit reluctant to give away a piece of property, or even recoup a little bit of money if there's an equal exchange somewhere. And I'm also interested in your opinion about the RFP, because it sounds like there's probably other people in this business also. So why didn't other people respond with different projections in their case?
can I just respond to that real quick?
Sure, yeah, of course.
So, a lot of our colleagues actually did look at this opportunity and dismissed it. The RFP was well-written, it was flexible, and it had scoring criteria that would allow, in a competitive situation, the town to kind of assign a value to each proposal. It was in accordance with 30B, which is the public bidding law for sale or disposition of property, to the T. I think you could give that to legal counsel and they would opine on that and probably come up with something along those lines. It was advertised in the Central Register, bless you, which is the document that basically puts all of the dispositions out in the public eye, and it's published every 2 weeks.
We all get emails. We're all signed up.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's like $100
So-
with the Secretary of State. We all get emails for everything.
And the other thing I would add is Quinn and Associates was brought on board at the direction of the town manager, which I think was a good move, so you could get a wider net cast and kind of see about commercial opportunities, if there were any, for folks to come in and potentially bid on the property. I heard there was some interest, but from the broker, but none of the respondents put a forward proposal like we did. We did spend significant time and resources to put the document together, and we're proud of it, and we want you to be proud of it too. And to that point, we don't really want to do this project if you guys don't want to do this. That's what this comes down to. We are totally in. But if you guys think, it's a boondoggle or, there's something here that's not transparent, that's not us. We're extremely transparent individuals. Again, you can check any of our references. We're committed to doing this project. We are committed to working with the town to make changes where, we can. And, we would really like to do it. I think that's the nuts and bolts of it.
I don't want to dominate the floor, but I have two additional questions.
Great.
So the town is working with a different developer on a totally commercial residential project, right? And the area like this is zoned to be a density of, well, in the downtown area, we have a density of 18 units per. And so we're trying to elevate that, but when I look at this project and I compare it against that project, this is running about 26 per, this is about a 2-acre lot, right? So 26 units per acre, and then the 80 bedrooms total. And then we're also a little bit critical of the 1-to-1. It's more like 1/2 to 1 there. And here it's only 1-to-1.
Yeah.
So are we squeezing a lot into a small space for the credits and that sort of thing? Are we going to have parking issues? Are we going to have?
I mean,
I don't know, because when I juxtapose the two projects,
yeah.
and I say, why can't we give the other developer 26 per if we're doing 26 per on this one? Why can't we say 1-to-1 for the residential units when we're asking for a 1.5 and we wouldn't ask for that here? So
I think the 1-to-1. Well, I think the 1-to-1 needs to be re-examined, definitely. Because although it is a walkable site, if you have an elderly person living in the development, they're not going to walk to town, right? I mean, who are we kidding? So
They might.
They might. But for the most part,
I do want to make one point.
yeah. No, I was going to say. So I think there's flexibility around that. We have to think a little bit outside the box, though, too. So there's people thinking outside the box about parking right now. And they're looking at, well, we can create open space here, and if the demand comes, we're zoned to create a space here. And there's actually, I forgot what it's called, it's called green. There's actually a product. that you
Pervious
can-
paver?
No, we're using it on my other site, where you can actually pull it up, and it creates parking. You know, so it actually, like, no longer do you just have, like, my site has 50 parking spaces. You have 50, but you could go down to 40 and you can go up to 60, right? Those are the sorts of things that can happen. I mean, I know that there's a dense development behind the site, right? There's the CHA next door, so I don't think it's totally out of line. You know, the new building we're proposing is 3 stories, not out of character with the neighborhood, certainly. So, you know, it's a subjective question too, right?
Right.
The two things I would add, in my time with Trinity, I did a lot of parking analysis just because of doing large redevelopment projects with lots of units. That was always the first question, right? What's parking going to look like? So we surveyed a lot of our properties, and tax credit units typically have a 0.7 parking ratio. It's just kind of what we've observed, or they had observed in their properties. That's one thing that I noticed. And then, you know, I did a project in Boston with a 0.32 parking ratio. Now, granted, it's
Yeah, that's
Boston,
apples to
right?
oranges,
But,
though.
you know,
Yeah.
I'm just saying, like, there's a whole different school of thought on this parking conversation, and I think it's evolving in every community. So,
I think if you made the decision to move forward with this, we could hire someone like Desmond Associates to take a look and see what other developments are doing and if it's sufficient or not, and come up with like a precise parking ratio that would make sense.
I'm not saying it's wrong.
Yeah.
It's different than what we're talking about with the other project,
Yeah,
that's all.
yeah. This is the debate that's going on in most cities and towns now, is what is the right parking mix, both for today and 20 years from now, right? Because things are changing so quickly with shared parking, autonomous cars, all those sorts of things, right? So,
All right, I'll stop. I'll let the finance guys work it out.
I don't have the information in front of me, but what is the purchase? Is it $5,000? Is that the purchase price that I read in here, quickly scanning through?
yeah.
What other town money are you expecting to see?
So we're requesting, so in the purchase and sale agreement, we put in $250,000 for CPC funding from the housing pot, but it could come from open space as well. It's really up to the CPC committee. Could come from historic preservation too. And then I believe it's $30,000 a year for 15 years from the CPC. That for 15, that would allow us to leverage about $480,000 of additional debt.
From
So-
CPC?
Yeah, so the idea is, rather than asking for a lump sum, the idea is that we could underwrite that $30,000 a year. That would automatically go to day one raising $500,000 of debt. So taking $30,000 a year and leveraging it into $500,000 up front.
a lender would agree to make that loan based on that agreement.
Right here.
But that would obligate the town. So if the town happened to repeal CPA, the town would still be on the hook for those payments.
What were the real estate taxes estimated to be for this?
So we have a detailed breakdown in the
Tony
proposal.
may have an update. I have the binder.
But we looked at excise tax, we looked at everything together. So real estate excise taxes. I don't know, I'm not sure.
About
if we put in
100,000.
Water and sewer.
100,000 a year.
It's 100,000
Yeah, the
though.
total was 100,000 for the completely built-out project. And then,
About those tax credits, do we get any of that?
Well, so those go to build the building. We don't get any of it either, so.
All right, so I wanted to know.
Yeah, we don't get any tax credits. It all gets allocated out, so.
this is the schedule we prepared by phase.
You're gonna ask me to read it.
I'm sorry. Sorry about that. It's a lot of information trying to get on one page.
That's why God made these.
We can provide that to you in a larger format if
Yeah.
that's helpful.
Yeah, I can enlarge it from here.
Nice.
Love technology.
Old age is a terrible thing. How did we arrive at $5,000 for the, I guess I go back to the original statement, that seems really low.
Now, the $5,000 was part of the bid package, and it essentially assures that you're only soliciting serious bidders. So it's, there's no, the 5,000 doesn't relate to the value of the property or the value of the potential development or anything like that. It's simply to ensure that, you know, there are only serious people. You know, we don't want, you know, the guy that, you know, lives down the street saying, yeah, you know, I'll bid on that, what the heck? That's not what we can do. So this sort of separates the you know, tire kickers from the serious bidders, essentially.
And rather than writing us a check back, we just put it in the deal.
I mean, I understand on the face of it, it looks like, you know, from a person in the town, it looks like you have an asset here, right? You say, how in the world could the school building with land not be worth this, right? The fact is, the school building itself is very difficult and expensive to rehabilitate. It has environmental issues that cost a lot of money to fix, right? The town of Sharon took on a $1.3 million asbestos abatement, right? I mean, we could flip it and say, we'll pay you $400,000 as long as you do the asbestos. I mean, optically, that would look maybe better. At the end of the day, it's the same result, right?
I mean, that's what we proposed initially.
Yeah.
We offered, you know, $600,000, and we requested $1.8 million from the CPC to help us effectuate the development. And, you know, in conversations with Mr. Dutton and his staff and Tony, you know, that what's compromise was, well, what can we do here to reduce that amount, that request, that $1.8 million? So we talked for many weeks about how we might go about that, and this was the structure that we came up with. You know, that was ultimately how we got to where we are today.
I don't like it. I'm just saying, I don't like it.
I know, but
I like the first one. It should.
we're flexible.
different- the thing
We're
is-
totally flexible.
You've got it, the people, the taxpayers of Bridgewater, I look at this, there's two separate issues here. There's the community preservation money, which is tax money. I know, I understand that, but it's, the purpose of that money are for projects like this. That's fine. But it is an asset, it does have a value to it, and we could use some of that money in a capital project fund for needs in this community that we desperately need. Because we've been down this road before to some extent. And a building that we sold back in 1997 to the university, we sold it to them, they paid money for it, we didn't give it away. But they're the ones that had the money to go in and renovate it, not us, but we got a market price for that building. Some say it wasn't enough, but they went in and they turned it around and made it into a beautiful building for their needs. And this time around, we're doing a similar thing, but we're sort of giving it away, despite the fact of what might come to us through taxes and so forth down the road. But down the road, the taxpayers of this town are also going to be faced with what to do with an elementary school that's been sitting vacant for 3 years now. And if we're going to go back to the taxpayers and say, you know, we need X million dollars to either repair, renovate, or build a new elementary school, they're going to say, well, didn't you just give away a building? That's a tough sell in this town. Memories don't go back that far. That's the issue that I have, and that's the issue I hear out in this community.
Yeah, no, I understand. I definitely understand where you're coming from. I think the disconnect that we have is that we truly don't believe the building. We believe the building, unfortunately, has negative value.
I disagree.
Which
Well, maybe not. Maybe the building, I think the building does have some value.
I'm not saying
But
it
the
doesn't have
property-
sentimental value.
I think the building does have value, but the property is certainly valuable.
I think the building currently has almost zero value, not negative value. The reason is, if we use it for nothing, it costs basically a patrol car to drive by. You know, as long as we
Until some
don't,
kid gets in.
well, we don't improve it and lock up the, you know,
torn down.
plywood and that sort of thing, you know. But, yeah. You know, we're both here long enough, I'm sure everyone in the room, to remember the Hunt School deal. And in reality, it was probably a positive thing for the town, but the perception from anyone you ask is that the town lost on that deal.
Mm-hmm.
The reality is probably it was a positive thing, but again.
But
it's-
my understanding was Bridgewater State was the buyer of that, though, right?
Yeah,
So they were it's slightly different too, because they're not a private entity, right? They were using it for their purpose,
Right.
right?
Right.
So, you know, I mean, this was you couldn't be more transparent than this whole process, right? Like, it got blasted out everywhere. The market responded, you know, whether people think that it's worth something or not, the market responded. It responded. You know, the market's extremely efficient now. With the internet and email and everything else, everybody knows what's going on. Everybody across the state knows what's going on everywhere. We could sit back here and say, well, despite that, it's still really worth something, right? But I could tell you from the private sector, it's not, you know? So, but it's really your choice to make. Ultimately, it's your choice to make, you know, at the end of the day.
And I think, you know, time has elapsed and it will continue to elapse, you know? And as Mr. Dunn has said, you know, it's a liability to the town. It really is. And so this is an opportunity to shed that liability. What is that worth? What's the value of that to the town? I would say that that's pretty significant.
Can I ask a quick question?
Well, I just wanted to ask, when you introduce them, kind of preface that by saying, what, in your opinion, or how is this going to, you know, what is this, is it like the liability that's getting taken off the town?
So, yeah, and I think collectively we all believe that. The liability, we can't insure that building. That building is not insured. We can't insure it against hazard, and we can't insure it against liability. So if there's a fire in that building, it presents several problems, but one is that somebody gets hurt, you know, battling the fire, somebody gets hurt inside the building. We're not insured for that. So the second liability issue is the hazardous materials. We know there's lead paint all through the building. We know there's asbestos throughout the building. That's a liability. So if that costs us, as a town, if it costs us $1 million to abate, that's a liability. So if the appraisal says that it's worth $970, which is what it says, the appraisal also says that it doesn't take into any account the hazardous materials that could be in that building. We already know there's asbestos and we already know there's lead paint. We assume there's PCBs in there, and there could be underground tanks. So when I look at this, and when I talked about, you know, the noise, I wasn't being uncharitable to anybody, but, you know, because everybody has their take based on what they know. I know what the liability is to carry that building. We can't insure it, and we also know that there's hazardous materials there. So if we demolish the building, there's $1 million expense. If we abate what we know is there, there's at least a $400,000 expense. And if that building burns down, all those expenses grow exponentially because it's exponentially more expensive to clean the site of those hazardous materials than it is to address the hazardous materials before, you know, while it's a standing building. So, you know, two things. We're getting $1 and we're transferring possibly $1 million liability for the hazardous materials, and we're transferring a liability that you couldn't begin to measure because it's not an insurable property. So that's my take, and I absolutely appreciate, you know, the comparisons to the Hunt School. I think as Councilor Wood said, I think those are, and Councilor Gallagher as well, those are comparisons that are going to be made, but they're somewhat misguided, because I agree. I think, you know, if you do a careful analysis of the Hunt School, you'll see that we still, to this day, some 20 some odd years later, gain a benefit from the sale of that place to the university. And it's real dollars. It's not, you know, just concocted, arguments. It's actually real dollars. So, but yeah, as I say, that's George, to answer your question, the liability is the hazardous abatement and the uninsured building.
I think you need to find some way to put that in a perspective, though, that people in the community understand. And that's the problem. Whether or not this is a good financial deal for the town, doesn't matter, because I'm getting probably the same email traffic that Councilor Gallagher is getting, which is probably the same email traffic. I've literally had one person say, yeah, this is let's just move on the deal. Everybody else says, what are you doing?
To I know you have a question, but just let me add what we see as the financial benefits to the town. I just want to say that one more time. So it's the $100,000 in new tax revenue because the property's never been taxed. It's $280,000 in fees, as a result of our putting a shovel in the ground that the town will see, one-time fees. It's potential cash flow from the property to repay the debt service on the loan. That's also viable. And there's construction cost savings, which is a real thing. It's, we get budgets and we build this stuff, but we're trying to save money every single day. That is like number one on our list when we're going out there and doing these projects. So if we can have a cost savings provision in our contract with our GC, which we do, then we will share those cost savings with the lenders, and you are, one of those lenders. So there are tangible financial benefits. It's just not $500,000 payment. That's just not what it is.
Tony, last meeting we had, you had gone through the budget information. What was the average cost for a kid in school? For a kid in school, what was the average cost roughly?
I don't have that in front of me.
If I remember, was it like
$13,000?
$13,000? Something like that. That's what I was thinking. Yeah.
Something like that.
So just doing some quick math, I was thinking about it. A project like this, let's say 52 units, let's say half of it has kids in it, let's say 26 kids times $13,000 roughly.
So that's a really good question.
$300,000 a year, and then taking into consideration the 100,000, taking into consideration the taxes that you get, you're into for 200 and something a year, just in costs of having extra kids in the school.
But
So can I, do you mind, go ahead.
well, I don't want to interrupt, but you have to remember that, that's the cost of educating, that's the average cost of educating. So every additional child that comes into the district, we're not paying $13,000 more in our assessment. There's a term for that.
It's the tipping point, right? So it's the extra kid that requires a new classroom to be opened, right? Is what creates the cost, right? So when you have to hire that new teacher and open that new classroom, so adding a seat to a classroom is more de minimis. It's when you reach that tipping point and actually have to open up a new classroom, that's where you get hit, right? And there was actually a study done by MAPC that was written about in the Boston Globe recently that we can circulate around. That and you're right to think this way, but that disproves the theory that each kid is, and 13,000 is actually relatively low. A lot of seasoned towns are 17, 20, 22. But yeah, that basically says this is not actually the case. But to your point, there are expenses associated with the development, certainly.
And I guess the item that really you can never really get your finger on is being able to forecast how many kids would come into a project like that, right? Because we've seen because this is a 40B, right, essentially?
This would be,
That's the
yeah.
permitting
Where
mechanism that we would
it's
use.
100% goes to the ASH.
We can forecast it, actually.
Yeah.
We'd have to hire someone. There are ratios that could apply to 1 beds, 2 beds, and 3 beds.
Yeah, the forecast is only
Yeah.
as good as the moment you put it on paper, right? And
Yeah.
it dissipates after that.
I don't think you can assume that it's gonna be 52 new resident or 52 new
You can never assume. Yeah.
people, some of them will already be existing in Bridgewater, I'm assuming.
So that's actually a really good point we didn't mention in the presentation, which is we were proposing DHCD, the state agency, would have to approve this, but we're proposing a 70% local preference, and the town can come up with what that local preference would be, meaning that 70% of the apartments would have a preference to folks that currently live in Bridgewater, maybe work in Bridgewater, right? So they would have priority over anybody else. Anybody from outside communities coming in, 70% of the units, so 35 or so, 36, would be set aside to have preference for Bridgewater residents or people who work in Bridgewater, which I think is a really important point. Again, that has to get approved by DHCD, but I think there's a really good case here to be made for that. So certainly when seniors are getting priced out of their homes and not able to stay in their homes. So, sir.
On the 3P, how long was that partnership for?
Which one? I'm sorry.
Public-private partnership.
Yeah. What do you mean though?
How long is 3P, the triple P, whatever?
Yeah. What do you mean in terms of?
It goes a partnership. How long is that partnership?
So
How long is the fiduciary responsibilities of that partnership?
So there's no real fiduciary responsibilities on the part of the town except to advance the funds, right? There's fiduciary responsibilities on the part of us to make sure we comply with all of your reporting requirements.
There's fiduciary responsibilities for both sides.
Right, but the town's portion is just providing the funding. Our portion would be for the 15-year, so it would actually be, the CPC loan would be a long-term loan, probably 40 years. It's all negotiable, 30, 40 years, something like that. So we would have to be providing audited financials to you for 30 to 40 years, in essence, right?
Collaborators securing necessary local, state, and federal resources required to develop the proposed project. So as a lender, we would have, and by doing this partnership, there would be an inherent risk.
Only if you didn't meet your commitment, like funding commitments. It would be as though if you didn't fund, if you provided a loan commitment and signed loan documents and then decided you weren't going to fund, that would be your risk. Right.
You don't have any of the day-to-day risks.
You don't have any day-to-day risks in terms of operating the development. There's no liability risks. You'd be a lender just like the state's a lender. Most cities and towns in Massachusetts, certainly the ones that have CPC funding, provide these as loans to for-profit entities. The reason why you wouldn't want to do it as a grant is it would be taxable to us. It would diminish the value, right? And then eventually the hope would be that you get repaid too because it's a loan. So
And just a good analogy, he watches some reality show. You sign this P&S and you find problems that are way beyond what you expected.
Yep.
That's on you.
No. So if we sign the P&S and we haven't closed on the property and we find like a plume of gasoline underlaying the site, we will come to you, we will show you the report, we will say, we're here to work with you, and we'll try to figure out how to remediate it. To be honest with you, that's your problem, whether we're here or not, or whether, it's either your problem today or 10 years from now or 20 years from now, but it's your problem. It's still a problem, right? You're just finding out about it. And the sooner you find out about stuff like that, the better, because those things tend to move. And
You sign the P&S and you spend a significant amount of money to find out those problems.
that's on us. The cost of that is on us.
Okay, that's what I
Yes,
was getting.
yes. Yeah.
There's nothing in here, there's no fine print that, if the buyer decides not to close.
We can walk away if we find, it's an EPA brownfield site or really at our discretion, we can walk away. And we provide you with all of the reports. We'd be walking away at that point with significant funds in the deal. I mean, those sorts of things don't really scare us, to be honest with you. I mean, I can't even tell you, like I've shipped soil to like half the country.
Actually.
Yeah, Model City, New York. Like, I mean, I found PCBs, fuel oil, gasoline, asbestos,
Yeah, it's urban
arsenic,
conditions.
you name it. I mean,
We're used to that stuff. Those are things that we take on as risks, and we try and
yeah,
we will solve those
and we would try to, but that's the point is like, we might come back and say, look, we need to work with you to figure this out, right? So that's where when Matt said earlier, we need you to be committed to this, is like, that's the stuff that comes up in these deals. And we're not saying, give us all the money to do it. We're saying, let's figure out how we can solve this problem together. Mass Development has a brownfields fund that we could apply to. The EPA, I think, still has a brownfields fund that you could apply to.
That's our job.
These deals don't get done overnight, right? And we're here
And
to,
so
to do it with
that's
you.
a good point, Jason, because, we've been at this for a while with you guys, and, we want to move forward, but, and the next step is for us to kind of get site control so we can do this work and can really find out what we're doing here. And that's why, we're here before you tonight, or we'll come before you tomorrow and make a similar presentation. We're committed, but we need you guys to let us know where you are on this so we can begin to raise resources. Raising resources for this is going to take a lot of time and energy.
Years.
It will take years. And that's why the PNS is as long as it is with the option extensions, but we are committed to this thing. And if we start spending money, we can't recoup that money until we close. So, there's a lot of risk that we'll be carrying, but we're open to that.
Sorry.
But that's a risk, whether we go forward with this deal or we sell it to somebody else for what we feel is fair market value 17 years.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
That's
We're
totally
still gonna have to deal with that 17 years from now.
Yeah, exactly.
So
Exactly.
two questions, Michael. One, how many people responded to the RFP? And secondly, how long have we sat on this problem?
Number one, just one group responded to the RFP, and I didn't hear your second
How
question.
many did it go out to? Sorry.
We had, I think we had 14 that actually pulled the RFP, and then some of those were plan houses that pushed those RFPs out to their clients. So you don't know how many others got it. But it went, as I say, the RFP went out, advertised, we gave it a very fair amount of time for a return, went to the Central Register, and as Jason pointed out, I think the Central Register is sort of the clearinghouse for all municipal projects and property, whether it's lease, sale, either side of the equation, so.
And then how long have we been sitting on
The property, I believe, was abandoned by the schools in the late 90s.
Yeah.
And then I think it was used as a
20
youth
years.
center.
They had units in the back that were used for like an alternative high school.
Yeah, there were units that at one point were in good shape and were used after the schools had moved out. And the building, the McElwain itself was used as I believe, a youth center, or teen center of some sort for a little while.
Still couches in there.
Yeah.
No, it's just, because I get the political conversation about what we could get. And I'll bet that 90% of the town doesn't like the deal. But I can also sit back and say, I can see a real situation where 22 years from now, we're still talking about it. And we've done nothing with it. Because as a town, we sometimes get into those predicaments. So we're I'm not saying this is the right deal or not. I don't have enough information, honestly, to make, I'd like to talk about it a little bit more. But I do see a possibility that 10 years from now, we're all in different positions, and somebody else is having this conversation with the same.
It's probably in your proposal, but if you got the green light tomorrow, what are we looking at for time? I know it's an estimate.
To actually close and start construction? Realistically? 3 years. If we said go tomorrow, realistically. Yeah.
If you close tomorrow?
No, no.
Or if you sign the.
So if we sign the purchase and sale agreement tomorrow,
Now, we will do everything we can to accelerate that, but that is
Yeah.
an honest answer.
it's a long process.
We did have an opportunity to get some resources, and we spoke about this when we started the process. It was called the Community Scale Housing Initiative. There was $10 million made available to projects that were 5 to 20 units in size, and we proposed that the McElwain be a standalone project. We actually submitted the project before even, we paid the fee, and submitted the project before even submitting a 30B response, right? That was,
Just to take their temperature.
they allocated $2 million and they have $8 million left. I talked to the administrator this morning. There are 11 additional applications. We went ahead and put in an application for that money as well. I mean,
We
it would
won't
be
be ready.
really hard
We
for
wouldn't
us
be
to
ready,
do
though.
that.
I'm just-
If
there-
we had
there's
signed this thing
readiness
a
to
month
proceed.
ago,
Yeah.
we might have been ready, so we could have gotten to Mass Historic, we would have started our environmental investigations, you know, whatever, that's water under the bridge. Resources become available all the time. We stay really close to this stuff. You know, we work with CHAPA, which is a Citizens Housing and Planning Association. You know, Jason's very heavily involved with the historic groups within the Commonwealth. So, you know, we're constantly looking for resources. So if we sign this PNS, we're committed to it. We're gonna try and effectuate the development as quickly as possible.
Mike, can I ask you a question regarding the community preservation? I mean, usually things come to the council when we've had all the recommendations from the committees and so forth that are involved. In this case, you know, we could, both the Finance Committee and the Budget and Finance Committee could vote up or down this tonight, because it's in front of us, we could. And tomorrow night, the council could vote as well, based on the recommendations from the Finance Committee and the Budget and Finance. But where is this, does the community preservation come in? Because they're the bigger nut here as far as funding goes. So, I mean, I pretty much know how I'm going to support, how I'm going to vote on this, but prior to taking that vote, I'd like to hear what the community preservation has to say about the funding mechanism, and that may make sense to see what they say. It may sway a couple other people's votes one way or the other, because community preservation, it's around today, it might not be around tomorrow, and that's a risk that we take as a town, as you said a few times during your presentation, that, you know, in 10 years, that could be a repeal, that could be, you know, you don't know, statewide, never mind the town, and we're still on the hook for that, was it 30 grand a year? Small money, but it's something. So I guess my question is wouldn't it make sense for us to have that recommendation before the council before we took a final vote on it?
That's possible. They don't have,
Necessary. It's not necessary.
well, it's not necessary, no, because they haven't been given, there's no request to them for funding yet. That comes after they do their due diligence, they go through and they start to compile the different levels and layers of funding. The CPC is part of that. Now, these guys went to the Community Preservation Committee and did a presentation, and they didn't, I don't believe they voted, but I think in terms of you know, sort of unanimous consent or the feeling amongst the committee was that they were supportive of this project. But as I said, they didn't vote. I'm sure they didn't vote because they didn't have anything to vote on, but.
Is it required that they take a vote to expend the funds that would be necessary for this?
You, as a council, you can't vote community preservation funds unless it's gotten a positive vote recommendation from the CPC.
And that hasn't been done yet.
No, that won't be done, and it may not be done for a year or 2 years. I mean, that's another part of the process. This is only really one step in the process, and I didn't mention it earlier, but this essentially gives these two guys site control, which is, you know, a term of art in terms of affordable housing, but it allows them to go to the funding agencies and begin the application processes for the funding. So
What legally are we binding to by signing this purchase and sales agreement without the commitment from community preservation?
essentially, you're giving them site control. That's really it.
I think it's a financial question.
On a building that's not insured, we're giving them access to a building that we own that's not insured.
They're insured.
We are insured.
I'm sure heavily insured.
I think it's a
You can't
cash
even
flow.
imagine.
We're over-insured. I know I am.
I think it's a cash flow question, though. So if the PNS relies on the use of community preservation funds to make the PNS, but the CPC hasn't met yet to even, judge those funds, then if we got to the place where we said, yeah, let's go ahead and sign, the question I think Dennis has is, are we then on the hook for the CPC money value if the CPC declines to support this project?
As a legal matter, you can't be. And one of the reasons that I asked Mark Bobrowski to negotiate this was exactly to your point. I wanted to make sure that, that it did what we intended it to do, and it didn't create any additional burden or liability for the town as we go through this process. So the CPC process, the application to CPC, these guys are responsible for. CPC makes a recommendation, comes back to the council votes that recommendation. So what's included in here, as I mentioned, probably, well, I may or may not have mentioned this earlier, but this isn't like the purchase and sale agreement to buy your house. I mean, it's not that type of agreement. It's a binding agreement, and it obligates both parties to the extent that is in the agreement, but it doesn't, there's no, there's no mortgage contingency clauses that you would see in your typical purchase and sale. It's much more just a step in the process that gives us a path to go down and spells out the path, but there's still obligations that they have to fulfill in terms of funding applications to CPC, and applications to the ZBA as well. So
And you
this
could
is-
get in there and do your site, get access to the site, get in there and just turn around and say, we're done. We can't deal with this, right? You could walk away.
Technically, yes.
Technically, we
I
wouldn't do
I
that.
don't envision a scenario
Or you
where
could get
do
in
that.
there,
Right.
or you could get in there and see, oh my God, this is a $500,000 issue. Let's go talk to the town of Bridgewater. We may need half of that from them, possibly, right? Those are scenarios.
Yes.
Yes.
Or will you come with us to Mass Development? We'll sit together and see if we can raise the money together.
Or
Yeah.
10 other things that we'll come up with as a result of that situation.
But, right, yeah, and I think Michael perfectly characterized the P&S. The one thing I do want to say, though, is that, once this gets signed, we will be investing some significant resources. And so, if you do vote in favor of it, we'd hope that you would be supportive not just of the P&S, but of what we're proposing as well, right? So it's not just like, we're going to sign the P&S on this,
Yep.
but really, we don't really want the CPC funding to go ahead. It's sort of, in our mind, it's sort of a vote of good faith, and a vote of confidence for the project, right? Even though it's not technically a vote for CPC funding, certainly you can't provide any sort of zoning relief,
There's an
So-
approvals definition in the document that states that coupled with a friendly 40B type process, will go through with you all to get the project permitted and financed and then ultimately constructed. That's the spirit of the agreement.
Go off of what he said, when Mike said, 20 years from now, our replacements could potentially still be talking about the McKelvin building, could be talking about the old town hall, could be talking about this building, for all we know. But I ask you, say the town, who do you think could get the hazmat out of there cheaper, you or them?
Oh, them. Definitely.
Okay.
I mean, municipalities have a way of making sure that everything is ultra expensive. And that's the process. And you can certainly go to any number of builders in town and say, geez, this building, I could have done that for $5 million. Well, maybe that's true, maybe that's not, but there's a lot of other stuff that we're required to do, and we do, but it's just part of the process.
So then I'll revert this question to you, and I don't know, you guys have been in the business long enough, but it's more of a common sense question. Does it cost more today to remove hazardous materials than it did 18 years ago?
Of course.
It's going to cost more in a couple months. And, quite frankly, if we have site control and we're committed to this project, that's our problem. That's not your. Cost escalation is our problem. That's why we're invested to move the project forward as quickly as we can.
So just an aside, when Jason talks about, expending funds to do their due diligence, the town of Sharon, well, you have it in front of you. I think the number was in the 200 range, just to do the preparatory work to do the remediation or the abatement. So, so that's not insignificant amount of money that we don't have to spend.
Gonna hear this all again tomorrow night, so.
So let me ask,
Are you guys coming back tomorrow night?
My wife might kill me, but whatever.
Mine too.
I'm already in the doghouse, so it doesn't really matter.
I'm not. I'm doing pretty good right now. I have a 9-month-old.
Well, not him. I used to sit here in council till 2 a.m. sometimes.
Oh my
It was
God.
crazy in the early years.
we'll only keep you till 1 a.m.
Gee, thanks.
We're happy to come back.
I think you'll probably get a lot of, you're getting some here, but I think you'll get a lot of finance questions. I mean, I know, Councilor Gallagher's position. I haven't made up my mind yet, but I'm having trouble with the cash flows. That's where my difficulty is. Because I can see what the purchase sale says. I hear loan from CPC, but I don't see repay of the loan. I see CPC money going out from the right bucket for the right reason, and that makes sense to me, right? Because it could be a different project or this one. I do hear a density that's higher than other projects that we're supporting on the truly commercial residential side, which I don't know if that's good or bad. Maybe it is 0.7 reality for parking. Maybe it's something different. I don't know if you have control over ages. I know there's control over income. I don't recall if there's like a minimum income, because one of the concerns might be not only children, but maybe this type of environment also becomes attractive to college students for college housing.
Great question. Can I answer that?
Yeah.
Okay, so the low-income housing tax credit program specifically prohibits renting to full-time students. So that also means, though, if you have a 50-year-old full-time undergrad, you cannot rent to that person. Okay, it's explicitly prohibited in the Internal Revenue Code, with a few exceptions, like if the child was in the foster care system, right, and now they're a student. You are also, being an undergraduate student is not a protected class under the Fair Housing Act. So for all of my market rate apartments, we do not allow undergrads to live in any of our units. So it's both an internal company policy, and it's specifically prohibited by the Low Income Housing Tax Credit Program.
So say you get a 23-year-old guy in the sheet metal union.
Yep.
And, he's been doing his thing, and he says, I want to take some night classes.
Yep.
Did he get evicted?
No, that's not a full-time student.
Full-time.
Yep. So a full-time student is someone who,
Is enrolled.
working in the library and being an undergrad at Bridgewater State, that's a full-time student, right? Even though they're working.
I
Yeah.
work full-time while I went to undergrad and postgrad. So how would that?
So unfortunately, first of all, I'm totally admire that. Second of all, if you are technically a full-time student, registered in a university as a full-time student, unfortunately, you would not qualify. I'm not saying the rules totally make sense, but
These are condos, not rentals, am I correct?
these are rentals.
These are rentals.
These are rentals, yes. Which is why we have to own it for 15 years, right? Which translates directly to how we build the building, to be honest with you. So when our contractor says, do you want to put this roof on for $10,000 or this roof on for $15,000, and the $15,000 roof is a better roof, we tend to put the $15,000 roof on, because we don't want to have problems 10 years from now. One thing we had offered, we'd love to take anybody who's interested around to some of our buildings and see the quality of the work. We have nothing to hide at all. And in fact, we'd love to show you what they look like, because, there's one thing to see it up on the screen, there's another to actually see and touch it and feel it. We're all really proud of what we've done, so. And that's the other thing, I don't want it to get lost with sort of what the town is getting financially, right? Big picture, we want you to like what we're doing. We want you to like the fact, and we know that you like the fact that we're going to save the building, but we're going to do a really careful historic restoration of the building, working with the Mass Historical Commission and the National Park Service. we really want that to be a part of your decision-making, not just the financial benefits to the town, to be honest with you. Like, we really want you to be excited about the fact that seniors who, are empty nesters and don't want to keep their single-family home are going to have, like, a really amazing place to live. You go to the Wilbur School, right? Most of the Wilbur School was actually an addition that we put on. I don't know if you knew that or not, but, like, the school itself only has 20, 30 units in it. The remainder is in a new addition that we put on. Again, when I was at Beacon, that's not my company now. So definitely the financial benefits, but we also just want you to be excited about the project. And if you're not, that's okay too. We just tell us, because we have a lot of energy behind this stuff and we're really passionate about it. So anyways. Thanks.
Thank you for that 10-minute presentation.
You're welcome.
So it has some take-home value we printed it for you.
And we can share the presentation. You feel free to post it on the website, so.
Would it be better if they made it like $2?
It's 5,000, it's not one.
Live in here.
So
Move here, Bill.
I'm sensing that there's probably a lot more information that people want to try to garner and generate before they actually take a vote on it. So correct me if I'm wrong. So I'm happy to put together more information and try to articulate why I think it's a good idea, and I'll pass that along.
We did at the council meeting a couple weeks ago, and you might want to share that with the finance committee, unless they're ready to make a decision tonight, but I know Councilor Loesch and myself asked for like a spreadsheet of the costs to the town, for example, the closing costs and,
We cover all those, by the way.
We'll cover all those costs.
huh?
Special counsel
We will pay your council's costs, we will pay all closing costs, all recording fees. Well, there really won't be recording fees in this case, but yes, we will cover all of that.
I don't know how the rest of the committee, but I'm not prepared to make a yay or a nay on it until I get more information in one document that you can read.
Mr. Chairman, I agree with him. I don't think we're ready for that tonight. I'm not.
We're not making the decision we're making the decision to sign the P&S. That's all we're doing. We're giving them permission to go on site and to
I understand.
give us more. It's going to get to a point where they can't give us more information until they get on site.
But I don't have any information other than what's here. So I'd like to have the rest of that. If you've got a presentation that was made to the town council, I'd like to see it. And I'd like to see it before we have the meeting, not as we're walking in the door.
No, I think that's fair. We'll put together a whole packet of information and try to put something together in spreadsheet form. Get that to everybody.
I heard that the council was
Yeah.
That would be my preference, yeah.
Are they getting basically the same presentation?
Yeah, I think so. And we want, if it takes you a little bit more time, we want you to take the time you need, Because we really need you to be committed.
And the council does, heavily respect what the finance committee recommends to us. So we really, hopefully, there's 7 other councilors other than Bill and I, so I would assume, because you guys are leaning towards more time, that we would ask to wait tomorrow night as well. I would assume that, but, right, Bill?
Yeah, I would think so. There's a lot of intrinsic value here. Housing stock is one that we haven't really talked about, and other things like that.
Can you just, I don't mean to continue the meeting, but, so we provided a bunch of materials in our proposal with budgets and things like that. Are there specific additional things that you'd like us to provide in addition to what we presented tonight and the proposal?
Well, I'd like to see what you presented before, and that may answer all the questions.
Okay,
Yeah,
And then if we have questions, we could contact the town manager.
sure.
Just to be clear on what we have done to date, we've submitted this binder, which is a PDF, which is, we did a public presentation December 15th, Michael, was that? which was not dissimilar from this presentation, but we've added to this to account for the things that we've been hearing over the past couple of months. And that's essentially everything that's been presented to date. And the council presentation will be the same presentation you received.
Tomorrow night.
Thanks.
Thank you.
B14.
Right here.
B14.
Any public comments?
Thank you all. We appreciate the time.
Do we have a
We got,
We still got to talk about spending $50 million now, right?
55?
55 million?
sir, do you have any public comments?
At that point in the meeting? I do have.
You can talk.
One of the zoning of that building, just FYI, that zoning is for live workspace. There's not any live workspace proposed in this, and I've heard the arguments why you shouldn't go that way. I'm assuming that goes through ZBA for change. There's a lot of questions.
Motion to adjourn.
Well, you got a
Do
budget.
you guys have a budget to discuss or no?
Just handing out some documents and maybe a quick.
We'll wait for those.
My motion still stands.
I'm not on your committee, so I don't know.
We voted on what we needed to vote on, right? Yeah.
5 minutes.
Oh, no, give us the binders.
Table. Yeah. Someone would have to make a motion to table. We're not doing anything.
Oh, you don't want to table anything. That, in Robert's rules, when you table something,
Can't discuss it.
it kills the article before you.
No, that's why.
Fancy.
Yeah, you would postpone to a date certain.
Can you delay a motion? A motion to adjourn? You can delay the motion to adjourn. You can't debate it.
Waiting for a
Unless you
second
have, like,
on my
a-
motion.
Tony, do you have an electronic copy of this?
Actually, Tony, could I get a electronic copy too? And I'll just
I was
files.
promised last year that we'd get smaller binders this year.
Well, this is so that if you want to take last year's material and place it inside, you have 2 years worth of information.
And I'm gonna sell the other binder.
We're also,
I thought last year we said that we would take last year's binder and add this year's stuff to it.
Man, you guys are in. How about this?
How about you start spending money on binders and put trash
oh,
barrels in
these are the same
buildings,
binders.
these rooms?
Tough crowd. How about this? Bring back your other binder and we'll recycle it.
I don't know where that binder is.
That's why we had a binding.
I
I
probably,
think I'm using it for something else. I did not throw it away.
Okay, so I just want to tell you quickly what's in the documents. We won't go into it this evening. Town manager will be submitting his, has actually submitted his budget as required to town council sometime today. And the process officially begins when they refer it to the Budget and Finance Subcommittee. And this year, we're just getting the documents to you a little bit ahead of time. Last time, I think we gave you the binders when you came into the meeting. Now you have a chance to look at them before you come to the meeting and be prepared to ask any questions. For those who were part of the group last year, there's not that much of a change. One document is the budget resolution. That's tab 1. That was done back in, I guess it was adopted back in December, and that was the guidelines for the budget process. Tab 2 was the preliminary budget message and sources and uses document that was submitted to council as required under the charter. 3 is the town manager's budget message as it sits today with the sources and uses of funds and the actual backup documentation for the general fund. The council will get orders which will have the detail for voting for the general fund, sewer fund, water fund, and the other two enterprise funds, golf and transfer station. And then in each tab further, you'll have general government, public safety, health and human services, culture and recreation. There's 2 documents in there for each group. One is the overall budget, which includes salaries and expenses, and then there's an analysis of the salaries that shows headcounts from FY18 to 19 and the step increases and all the detail that will spell out for you fundamentally what's changed in the budget. We had a presentation that was open to employees this past week, where we reviewed where we were in big picture, sources and uses, gave them some educational information regarding how the budget process works, how the funding works, gave them the overview of where we were with the budget, and that we'd arrived at a balanced budget, and also gave them some education as to where the use of the funds go, you know, and I'll go over that with you next time. But it really, I think, gave those that were in attendance the realization that salaries, benefits in all the general fund budgets, the assessments by the school account for 92% of the use of funds. Salaries, benefits, the assessment from the school accounts for 92% of the use of funds. And when they saw that, I think that also gave them a perspective. And we had our first meeting today with one of the bargaining units, and one of the first things we did was review everything that we had reviewed in that meeting, which had some representatives from the, you know, the bargaining units in there, those who represent, let's say, the SEIU or the USW, and they're part of it. Obviously, it was open to them to be here, so they got that information as well. So this is something we're going to continue to share, and I wanted you to know that we're making this information as available to anyone that wants it. I do want to say one other thing. We met with the school superintendent and the 3 representatives from the school committee for the town of Bridgewater. We did that last week. The weeks are blurring together.
2 weeks.
2 weeks ago. And we sat down, we shared everything. We showed them what our costs were for our step increases. We explained to them our sources of revenues again. They asked questions regarding our capital plan. We had an hour-and-a-half, 2-hour discussion. It was quite fruitful. We discussed that we're in a different position right now. Our steps don't have our contract obligations going forward, don't have any COLAs built into them. I show them what our steps as a natural process of our contracts looks like, and it was understood that their structure has built into it for the next 2-3 years something that puts demands on their resources much greater than the town side. So there was a realization that our steps are at this level and theirs are at another level. So there was quite a bit of talk about that. So I just wanted this body to know that we continue to open the channels of communication with the school and with the town employees regarding the budget process. And that was an objective the town manager had set, and we continue to try to improve on what we do. I thank you.
Just real quick, I think in the past we had published schedule, and I thought it was even meeting more regular. Is there a schedule we can just make sure?
I recall that too, but I don't remember.
Yeah, there was a period where we meet every week.
Oh, you mean for this body?
Yeah.
As we got closer to the vote of the budget.
If we're not there yet, it's fine, I would rather share it than not, so that.
I think we're ready to get that schedule going. The formal kickoff is when the council refers. But I'll work with Ann and the town manager and
For a couple weeks.
yep, to get that schedule.
Meeting in May.
Okay?
Motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
Let's sit here all night.
I didn't call anyone a jerk.
Yeah, I agree.